very warm welcome to this, our fourth History and Heritage Group presentation of the history of our oldest lodges. And this evening we're very pleased to welcome Brother Alistair McIntosh, past master of the Lodge of Aberdeen, No.1ter, who will give a talk on the history of his lodge very shortly. Well, firstly, can I ask you that you make sure that you remain muted and that you have your video working in order to be identified. Before proceeding, I'd like to just introduce a few of the brethren who are with us this evening, notably the Grand Master Mason, Brother Ramsay McGee, who's ever present with these presentations on our oldest lodges. Delighted to have you with us again this evening, sir. Our speaker this evening is Brother Alistair McIntosh, as I've just mentioned. Delighted to see Alistair with us. We also have Brother Tom Jessup, who's the chair of the Information and Communications Committee and a past substitute Grand Master. Other members of the History and Heritage Group, Brother Charles Winston, who's a secretary, Brother Alistair Henderson, Brother Dr. Douglas Nichol, and this evening we are delighted to have Ralph Gurovitz of 753 Montefiore lend us some assistance on the technicalities. I've got a list of individuals that I've noticed here in the gallery, and I do apologise if I've missed anybody, but just very quickly, can I welcome our Grand Senior Warden, Brother Alexander Moncrief, Brother Ian Williamson, who's the Provincial Grand Master of Aberdeen City, Brother James Bartlett, who's the Assistant PGM in Gloucestershire, Brother Ewan Rutherford, the past Deputy Grand Master, Brother Tom Davidson, who of course is our Grand Almoner, Brother Andy Mushet, Provincial Grand Master of Glasgow, and Brother Tom Wood, Provincial Grand Master of Kilwinning. And I do again apologise if I've missed any more of the senior Masons in this brief introduction. Well, for those who are not already aware, and I know there's a number of new faces with us here this evening, let me just tell you about the History and Heritage Group. It's a subgroup of the Information and Communications Committee of the Grand Lodge of Scotland, and we have a fairly extensive remit to identify, collate, record, preserve and promote the history and culture of the Scottish craft. And a very early plug, we have a new project underway, a new oral history project where we're inviting brethren to record on their own devices a 4 or 5 minute video explaining their situation over the past 3 months during the lockdown, just how it's affected them and their Freemasonry. So if you're not already aware of it, please ask your Lodge Secretary, he has fuller details. Well, this series of presentations on the history of our oldest lodges is designed to remind our audience that Scotland does have the oldest lodges in the world. And this underlines the fact that Scotland is the home of modern Freemasonry. This evening's presentation and all of our proceedings are being recorded and available to view tomorrow on various pages. At this time, can I just invite our host to ensure that everybody is muted? Again, I'll mention that tonight's presentation is the history of the Lodge of Aberdeen, No.1ter, undertaken by Brother Alistair McIntosh. But before we move to that, can I just remind you, brethren, that there will be a question and answering session following the presentation. So I would ask you to hold any questions you might have until then. And in fact, it'd be a good idea if you would perhaps record any questions you might have on the chat box there. Later on, during the question and answer session, of course, if you do have another question to ask, just please raise your hand. Well, now I'd like to introduce the Grand Master Mason, Brother Ramsay McGee, if he would please now give a fuller introduction on our speaker this evening. Grand Master Mason, sir.
Thank you very much. Good evening, brethren. May I add my personal welcome to those who have never been at one of the presentations before. It's an absolute delight. Oh, we've gone muted again, have we? No. It's an absolute delight to see you all here this evening. Our speaker this evening is a third generation Freemason, his father and grandfather before him being members of the craft. Indeed, his grandfather, Duncan MacDonald Lowe, served as substitute Grand Master and Deputy Grand Master, having been the Grand Almoner for many, many years. Alistair himself was initiated into Lodge Bon Accord number 669 back in 1986. And from there he affiliated to the Lodge of Aberdeen No.1ter in 1999, becoming Master of the Lodge in 2006 and again in 2016. Alistair is currently the Secretary of the Lodge. He has also served the Provincial Grand Lodge of Aberdeen City very well indeed. He served as Provincial Grand Secretary for almost 10 years before being commissioned as Deputy Provincial Grand Master, which he held for a year, after which he was installed in 2007 as the Provincial Grand Master of the province of Aberdeen City. At Grand Lodge, Alistair has served in both the Grand Lodge Disciplinary Committee and Information and Technology Committee. So, brethren, I would ask you all to give a very warm welcome to Brother Alistair McIntosh. Thank you.
Thank you, Grandmaster Mason, Brother Ramsay McGee, for that very fine introduction of our speaker this evening. And I would now invite Brother Alistair McIntosh, please, if you would proceed with your presentation on the history of the Lodge of Aberdeen, No.1ter. The floor is yours, Alistair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Grandmaster Mason, for your kind introduction, and good evening, brethren. The history of the Lodge of Aberdeen can be witnessed through the Aberdeen City Archives and the Lodge's marked book. The Lodge of Aberdeen is one of the oldest lodges in Scotland and has made a distinctive contribution to the history of Freemasonry. Originally an operative or stonemason's lodge, it probably predates the celebrated Mark Book of 1670 by at least a couple of centuries. The first reference to a mason in Aberdeen occurs in 1264, when it is recorded that Richard Sementarius, Richard the Mason, was paid 20 marks for repairing the Castle of Aberdeen, and who in 1272 became the first provost of the borough and is now considered to be the architect of the Brig o' Balgownie. Rebuilding of St Macher Cathedral was commenced under Bishop Kinnairmund in 1357, and who, according to tradition, engaged a master mason, Andrew Scott, from Melrose, who brought with him other masons, and who is said to have introduced St John's masonry to Aberdeen. And it is thought that it was these stonemasons who first laid the foundation stones of a Masonic lodge. The archives of the city of Aberdeen hold some of the finest and most complete collection of medieval and early modern borough records in Scotland, and date from 1398. And it is in these registers, dating from the mid-15th century, that mention is continually made of the buildings being erected by masons, including iconic Aberdeen structures such as St Nicholas Church, the Mother Kirk, King's College from 1498. King's College was founded by Bishop Elphinston under a papal bull issued by Pope Alexander VI in 1495. The crown is a very interesting piece of the college. It is an imperial crown, not a royal one, and the significance of this is often missed. The imperial crown is a symbol of universal dominion as opposed to a national one, and it is likely that this crown was incorporated into the architecture to support the Scottish Crown's claim to imperial authority within Scotland. And the Bridge of Dee, still used as one of the main entrances to Aberdeen. It is the oldest continually used bridge in Scotland. The first reference in the town's records to a lodge is in 1483, in which one of the minutes records an obligation before the magistrate and council by the masons of the lodge, spelt L-U-D-G-E, to observe an agreement amongst themselves, a penalty for breaking this agreement being to be excluded from the lodge. It is one of the earliest recorded instances of the use of the word lodge in connection with the Scottish craft. The context used refers to the lodge as a corporate body of masons and not the building in which they met. In 1527, the borough magistrates issued a proclamation known as a Seal of Cause, incorporating certain crafts, including the masons, granting them disciplinary powers over their members. Via this Seal of Cause, the masons' craft for the first time obtained official recognition as one of the crafts in Aberdeen, with a number becoming burgesses. This was reaffirmed in 1541 when a second Seal of Cause was issued, which should have consolidated the masons' position in the official hierarchy of borough society. But there are few further mentions of the mason craft in the records, and masons disappear almost completely from the burgess role until the 1700s. One explanation for this may be that masons, perhaps through traditions of protecting their craft's autonomy, rejected the privilege and incorporation under the Seal of Cause, as it would have strengthened the hold of the borough over them. But a deacon of the masons is mentioned, along with those of the Wrights and Coopers, in 1554, suggesting that the masons were still regarded as one of the incorporated crafts. The masons never became part of the society formed by the Wrights, Coopers, and other trades. When the second Seal of Cause was obtained, the masons elected their own deacon, formed a society for themselves, passed bylaws, and accumulated funds in the same manner as the other associations. By a grant under the Privy Seal of 1590, James VI confirmed the right of a minor Aberdeenshire laird, Patrick Copeland of Udach, to act as warden and justice of the masons in the shires of Aberdeen, Banff, and Kincardine. The king sought advice from all the lodges in the northeast, and Copeland was universally recommended by them all. An appointment by popular choice of an early PGM, possibly. Over the centuries, the lodge met in various places. The rules stated that the brethren could not meet in a house where people were living, presumably so that no one could overhear what was being said. Their meeting places were therefore held in the open, in secluded places such as the sconces at the Point of Ness, approximately the area of the Cond Lighthouse, unless the weather was bad, in which case they met in a house, carefully chosen so no one could see or hear them. And given the climate in Aberdeen, it's very likely that most meetings were held indoors. One of the first buildings the lodge met in was on St. Catherine's Hill. This building was burnt down during a riot egged on by clerics. This was, this was the time of the Troubles, a name given locally to the various early Covenanter bishops' wars, which led directly to civil wars in each of the three kingdoms of Charles I. The town was fined several times by each side, and the various craft guilds had to pay their share. The town was then raped, sacked, and burned by the Marquis of Montrose in 1644. In 1646, during the Scottish Civil Wars, recorded as the Battle of Aberdeen, George, Marquis of Huntly, the commander of a royalist force, defeated a force of Covenanters under the commander Hugh, Lord Montgomery. Another meeting place had been acquired on or near the site of St. Paul's Church, and in 1648, the Marquis of Gordon and his son Viscount Aboyne raided the town and left much of it in smoking ruins, including the lodge building. This was devastating, as all the books, papers, and the early written records of the lodge were destroyed in the blaze which engulfed that part of Aberdeen. But the Troubles were not over. Not long after the Gordon raid, the plague infested Aberdeen. So many died that the town's graveyard was closed and communal burial pits were dug, somewhere east of what is now King Street. In all, the population was reduced by between 30 and 50%, and in the latter part of the 17th century, adverts were being placed in Dundee, among other places, seeking masons to come and work in Aberdeen. After the Gordon raid, the lodge reformed and grew stronger, and it was probably at this time that non-operative, mainly nobility, and those considered at the time to be gentlemen members were admitted, and the slow transformation from operative or stonemason to speculative Freemasonry began. By 1700, the lodge was strong enough to purchase a croft called Footismere. They built a meeting place on part of the land where they were to meet for the next 55 years. And a 1732 print shows the Lodge of the Freemasons as an isolated little house hidden by a hillock from the rest of Aberdeen. As all the papers, books, and other artifacts belonging to the lodge had been lost in the fire of 1648, the Masons at the time began salvaging and recording what information they could recollect and rewrite what had been lost. All this was gathered together in what was to become the Mark Book, dated 1670. Being supportive in the creation of the Grand Lodge of Scotland, the Lodge was represented at the inaugural meeting of Grand Lodge in 1736, becoming a founder member. A charter of ratification and confirmation was issued by Grand Lodge in 1743 and included the following. It is made appear by an extract of some of their old writings mentioned in the memorial and other documents produced, that in the year 1541 there had been a regular lodge formed in Aberdeen, declaring their presidency in the Grand Lodge to be and commence from the 26th day of December 1670. Given at the Grand Lodge held at St Mary's Chapel in Edinburgh, this 13th day of November 1743. By the Right Honourable and Most Worshipful James Earl of Weems, Lord Elcho, and present Grand Master. The charter was issued and the number allocated to the lodge was 39 on the roll. Following representation to Grand Lodge, a further charter was issued in 1876, with the number revised from 39 to 34 on the roll. This is the charter in use today. In 1890, the Lodge sent a petition to the Grand Lodge of Scotland in the following terms. That on more than one occasion your memorialists' predecessors have approached Grand Lodge praying that the present number of the Aberdeen Lodge on the roll of lodges of Grand Lodge of Scotland should be altered to such another number as would truly represent its position and antiquity among the said lodges. Your memorialists would seek respectively to remind Grand Lodge of the following facts, establishing the antiquity of the Lodge of Aberdeen. From the council registers of the city of Aberdeen, it appears that so early as 1483, Mason was flourishing in that city, and is proved by the Masons then making request that magistrates might interpone their authority on certain rules agreed upon by the Masons for their guidance, a breach of which rendered the offender liable to expulsion from the lodge. In 1527, the Masons were incorporated and a seal of cause granted to them by the magistrates, which the latter body confirmed and renewed in 1541. The existing records of the Lodge of Aberdeen began on the 26th of September 1670, but the list of members then given includes the names of more than one master of the lodge, thus proving that the first minute book, now extant, is only one of a series, the earlier volumes of which have been unfortunately lost. This fact is further attested from the various rules set down for working the lodge, which bear evidence that they had been in use prior to 1670. The petition goes on to state, your memorialists would likewise beg to point out to Grand Lodge that a similar difficulty has been overcome in the case of the Lodge of Glasgow, St John, whose number on the roll now stands at 3 bis. They would accordingly beg again to submit their case to Grand Lodge with the certainty of it receiving an impartial consideration, and to humbly supplicate that Grand Lodge would be pleased to restore the Aberdeen Lodge to its proper place in the roll of lodges, in such a manner as may seem best to them. Among those endorsing this petition was the Right Honourable Lord Saltoun, Provincial Grand Master of Aberdeen City from 1889 to 1893, and who was Grand Master Mason from 1897 to 1900. In 1891, Grand Lodge revised the number on the roll of the Lodge to No.1ter, and the charter was suitably endorsed. It is interesting to note that two of the many supporters of this petition were the eminent Masons W.J. Huan, perhaps best known for his revised edition of Mackie's Encyclopedia and his many papers published in Quater Coronatorum, and Robert Gould, one of the founders of Quater Coronati Lodge in 1886. And it is also interesting to note that they both appear in the Mark Book as honorary members. As more of the gentry were admitted, the status of the ordinary operative Masons was weakened, and the differences were brought to a head in 1755 when the Lodge decided to build the new inn on Castlegate. The craft Masons felt the monies being used for the project were depriving their elderly members, widows and orphans of assistance. In due course, the new inn was built next to the townhouse, which included lodge rooms on the top floor. To provide access, separate from the inn, the Masons formed a road at the side, which is still used and known today as Lodge Walk. This was considered the most important hostelry north of Edinburgh, and played host to many noteworthy men in their day, for example, James Boswell and Dr. Johnson during their tour, and also Robert Burns. Unfortunately, the lodge fragmented. The operative Masons left the lodge in the hands of the mainly speculative Masons and founded their new lodge for operative or craft Masons only. The operative lodge, number 150, dates from their charter of 1781 and admitted only stonemasons until, following the Second World War, when the granite industry went into decline, and by the 1950s most of the granite yards were gone, as were the famous North East Scotland quarries. The lodge carried on, but its membership, having been drawn entirely from the granite industry, and the membership now in serious decline, in 1963, a brave decision was taken in order for the lodge to survive. The lodge decided to admit non-operative Masons. Not only did this save the lodge, but the traditions and rituals of operative Masons were also preserved, for although the lodge is now entirely speculative, it continues to use operative ritual and therefore keeps alive the great history of the Aberdeen Granite Masons. The new inn was sold in 1835, and the lodge continued to hold meetings at various venues in Aberdeen until moving to the Masonic Hall in Exchange Street, where the lodges of the city met until 1910, when the Aberdeen Masonic Temple was consecrated. Now called Freemasons Hall, Aberdeen, it is home to 10 lodges in the province of Aberdeen City. The current Lodge seal dates from 1762 and is based on an earlier one, and the motto, which is taken from Horace, Epistle 1, reads, Commissum tegi et vino tortus et ira, which translates as conceal the secrets entrusted to you even when influenced by wine or anger. Now, in respect to some of the artifacts belonging to the lodge, I'll show you some examples. The Master's chair, which dates from 1710 and very uncomfortable. The Senior Warden's chair, dated 1709, and again not particularly comfortable. And the Junior Warden's chair, presented by a member in 1895, and has the date 1446 carved on it, and a coat of arms, and the initials GV and MS. This was probably a wedding chair. And I say all are still in use today. We also have a Geneva or Breach's Bible printed in Aberdeen printed in Amsterdam in 1640, which the minute show was presented to the lodge by a member in 1756. It is recorded that in 1737, the Earl of Contour presented the lodge with a set of jewels for the use of the master and the wardens, and that a new set for the office bearers was purchased in 1891. But unfortunately, these old jewels had disappeared. In February last year, Brother John Miller, our chairman, sent me a photograph of these jewels, which are on display in a museum in Warwick with the accompanying card. One wonders how and when they got to Warwick. Probably before 1891, as the lodge number is given as 34. And another story to be told. These are the mason boxes or locket kists. The boxes were used to keep the lodge's documents and money from 1700. The one on the left has been in the lodge possession forever, and the one on the right was purchased and presented recently. Its authenticity has not been confirmed, but a romantic view is that it was constructed by James Anderson, and as a glazier to trade, it was not of the same quality as the other, possibly made a bit later. And most importantly, the Mark Book. Very few lodges possess more complete or more interesting records relating to the early days of Freemasonry. And Gould, in his History of Freemason, says many of these documents possess features exclusively their own, while some are unsurpassed by any others of a similar character or interest and value. The Mark Book was written by James Anderson, glazier and master and writer of the book. He was born in 1649 and became a glazier and was admitted to the incorporation of Hammerman. It is unknown when he joined the lodge, but when he started compiling the Mark Book, he was secretary and was master in 1688 and again in 1694. He took the date of 1670 as the starting point for the book, as there had been a major reorganization of the lodge following the losses in 1648. The lodge is considered to be the earliest known to have drafted laws for its own governance. It is outstanding as an effort by one individual to gather together copies of what he, James Anderson, regarded as the key documents required by the lodge. Lists of members, laws, lodge laws and statutes, and the so-called Mason Charter, a version of the old charges. The Mark Book records the names of the members and apprentices of the lodge in 1670. The list of members amounted to 49, made up from fellow crafts or master masons and 11 apprentices. Only about 10 of the 49 names fall within the definition of operative masons. The non-operative members were in the ascendancy by a proportion of about 4-to-1. Of those 38, they consisted of 4 noblemen, a collector of customs, clergy, surgeons, advocates, merchants, and others. The Mark Book is completely handwritten, and along with the names and occupations of the lodge members at the time, and some lodge minutes, it contains a list of rules by which the lodge and its members were governed. There is also a list of rules to govern the benevolent side of the lodge. The lodge benevolent monies were stored with the Mark Book in the mason's box, or locket kist, which has 3 keys. No money could be released from the box unless the 3 holders were present at the same time. The Mark Book also contains material of great interest in the study of early Freemasonry in Scotland. It reveals a lodge with a remarkable social range of members, titled noblemen, landed gentlemen, academics, lawyers, merchants, and craftsmen of all sorts, including operative masons. One highly significant passage, which has not received the attention Masonic historians that it merits, deals with one of the most distinctive features of Masonic lodges. At the end of the list of the 49 members of the lodge, Anderson adds a passage which reads, "We entreat all our good successors in the Mason craft to follow our rule as your patrons and not to strive for place. For here you may sit in the order above written, and amongst the rest of our names, persons of a mean degree, craftsmen, before great persons of quality, the noblemen." Anderson felt it necessary to stress that in the lodge, the social hierarchy of the outside world was to be ignored, and it is the earliest evidence in the records of any lodge that Freemasons in their lodges temporarily subverted the prevailing principles of social hierarchy. This is then followed by an additional list entitled, "Here begins the names of our successors of the Mason craft in order as follows as Master Masons." The book has been in continuous use ever since that date, every new entrant and affiliate being recorded, with the most recent entry being at our last meeting in February this year. The name James Anderson should be familiar to English Freemasons as the principal author of the 1723 Constitution of the Freemasons, commissioned by the Grand Lodge of England. Excuse me. This is James Anderson Jr., the son of James Anderson, author of the Mark Book. James Anderson Jr., 1679 to 1739, seems a surprising choice as author of the constitutions. He was a Scot, and Scots were not popular in England. He was a Presbyterian preacher, tolerated in England, but unpopular in the eyes of the majority, and open to unofficial persecution. There is little known about his connection with Freemasonry, except that he was the son of Anderson Sr. He apparently was a member of the Horn Lodge in London, being recorded as such in 1723. It is likely that he was recommended to Grand Lodge as having expertise in the knowledge and teachings of Freemasonry, having learnt from his father. There is, of course, a great deal more that could be said about the content of the Mark Book, perhaps as a lecture in itself, but for now I will highlight a few interesting names contained in the list of members. John Montgomery, number 12 in the Mark Book, a Mason and Warden of the Lodge, designed and built the Market Cross, which stands in the Castle Gate. The Right Honourable John Keith, 3rd Earl of Kintore, as mentioned earlier, was affiliated to the Lodge in Aberdeen in December 1735. He was Master of the Lodge between 1736 and 1739. He also became the 3rd Grand Master Mason in 1738 and went on to become Grand Master in England in 1740, the first Freemason to do so. Lieutenant James Leith, later General Sir James Leith, joined the Lodge in 1780. His division held the centre of the Battle of Corunna. One of Wellington's most dependable generals, he was sent to the West Indies as Commander-in-Chief. He contracted and died of yellow fever in Barbados and was returned to England and buried with full military honours in Westminster Abbey. There are names of many of the architects and masons who designed and built the Granite City and edifices further afield, including Balmoral Castle, Queen Victoria and Prince Albert sarcophagus, the granite bowls in the fountains of Trafalgar Square, to mention a few. Also, local industrialists who created Aberdeen Harbour, Some have quays named after them, Stonywood and Muggy Moss paper mills, and the Crombie wool mill. Any self-respecting blade in the 1780s wanted a Crombie coat. Quakerism emerged in Aberdeen from 1663, and the records show that there were many members of the lodge who professed to be Quakers, but it's a mystery how, rejecting as they did oaths and ritual, they could have been initiated into Masonry. The Quakers were persecuted for many years, but this was abandoned in 1679. Many sought to escape local hostility by immigration, many to New Jersey. The final Quaker Mason immigrant from the Aberdeen Lodge was John Skene, listed number 27 in the Mark Book, who landed in Burlington in 1678 and was in Pennsylvania by about 1681. He became deputy governor of the colony in 1685 and died shortly after in 1690. John Skene has been hailed as the first Freemason to become a citizen of the Western Hemisphere, and there is no one earlier recorded example of an initiated Mason to immigrate to the New World. There are many more examples of noteworthy members of the Lodge that could be given, but moving to more recent times, the Provincial Grand Lodge of Aberdeen City and those of Aberdeen Shires East and West were constituted in 1827. 3 of the first 4 Provincial Grand Masters of Aberdeen City were members of the Lodge of Aberdeen, and on a further 4 occasions, past Masters of the Lodge have had the honour to become Provincial Grand Masters. The Lodge of Aberdeen No.1ter is today in very good heart. The current membership continues to be an eclectic mix of professions and has more recently introduced many younger members into the craft, ensuring that the Lodge will remain healthy and prosperous for generations in the future. And finally, preparations were well in hand for celebrating the 350th anniversary of the 1670 Mark Book and the rededication of the Lodge by a large deputation from the Grand Lodge of Scotland in April this year. Unfortunately, due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, these celebrations have been deferred until April 2021, when we hope to complete the semi-centennial anniversary. Thank you for your attention.
Brother Alistair, may I, on behalf of the brethren assembled, thank you for a very well-researched and very well-presented paper on the Lodge of Aberdeen No.1ter. Excellent, sir. You should be very proud of what you put together for this presentation this evening, and of course you'll be very proud of your ancient lodge. We'll now move into a question and answering session. And first of all, I would ask Brother Charles Winston, the Secretary of the History and Heritage Group, if he'd be good enough to read out any questions that have been posted in the chat box as starters. Brother Charles Winston, do we have any?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, we have quite a number of questions, Mr. Chairman, some of which can be grouped together. To begin with, a question from Brother Scott Harrison, asking about the origin of the motto of the Lodge and how it came to be chosen.
It's from Horace Epistle 1. I don't know how it came to be chosen.
We also have questions about...
could you unmute Harry Petrie? He might have some comment on that one.
I think brethren can unmute themselves if they wish to speak.
Okay, the Horace question, is that the one you're speaking about?
Yes.
Yeah, the only thing I can think on is the old Masonic adage about always keeping your mouth shut. So they picked a classical way of putting onto the seal. It's the only thing the only reason I can assign for that particular motto.
We have another question regarding and I don't know if you'll be able to answer this. A brother asking how many breeches or treacle Bibles there could possibly be within the Scottish craft. I don't know if anyone has any view on that. Anyone from the Lodge of Edinburgh?
Well, we know Edinburgh's got one, Aberdeen's got one. What about Glasgow, Melrose?
Number two's got one of each.
Cowan has one printed 1599.
Well, that's a good list for a start. I have a question regarding whether or not the Masons deliberately decided not to join the Wrights and others in the incorporation, or in fact, whether in fact they were even invited. Was it a deliberate decision, do you think, to remain outside the incorporation?
Very much so, because it would have given the borough power over them, and they didn't want that. They rejected that. They wanted to be their own society with their own laws, govern themselves.
A question from Brother Stephen O'Donnell asking at what point would a Mason place his mark in the book in those times? Was it when he joined, or did he receive his mark, or was the mark a separate issue at that time?
The first 49 names were members between probably 1648 at the time that things were lost and up to the 1700, and they had their Mason marks. The subsequent ones were listed as they joined the lodge.
Any other brethren wish to come in now with questions? I think that's all we have for the moment, Mr. Chairman.
If I can just one clarification what Alistair was saying about the mark. There is no, as far as we know of, a record of a thing like a marked degree, but there is in the earliest minute books that we have, there is reference to the mark and to mark masons, but it doesn't stipulate what they are or what they were.
Clearly in the cathedrals and other buildings from the PowerPoint presentation, there were marks made.
These are Mason's marks that have been found on these structures and noted over the years, collected.
Could I ask a brief question?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, I was very intrigued by your lecture, and thank you very much for that. I mean, you mentioned that you had a building in Futtersmire, which was a purchased croft, but prior to that, did I pick up that you had lodge premises in St. Catherine's? And if so, was it a purpose-built place, or was it just something that you purchased?
The earliest one kind of known on St. Catherine's Hill would have been built of wood, as were most of the dwelling type houses in that time. It was only significant structures like cathedrals and churches, castles, that were built of stone. So that was the first one on St. Catherine's Hill.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful.
For those who don't know where St. Catherine's Hill is, it doesn't exist anymore. They cut the top of it off to fill in the various valleys in the building of Union Street. Just a matter of interest.
Mr. Chairman, Sandy Marshall, can you hear me?
Oh, yes, Andy, I can hear you.
Yeah. Just a quick question. I noticed very interesting, Alistair, super, as I expected it to be a very interesting lecture. But right at the very beginning of the lecture, you mentioned the word, and it was actually in type Freemason. Now, you stated that that was around the 13th century. That couldn't surely be possible. And I'm taking it was just a bit of artistic license that you used there.
You're probably absolutely right.
Okay, that answers it.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, if Alistair would like to know more about those jewels, if he wants to communicate with me afterwards, I'll try and get some more information for him.
Who's that?
Those jewels in Warwick.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah, they're actually on a wall in the Masonic Hall in Warwick, not in a museum.
Okay. It was, that was just the information we had. In fact, John's email to me, he got an email from somebody in England asking if he could find out anything about it. And then John passed it to me.
Yeah, sorry, Alex, so that original email was from me, but carry on.
Oh, sorry. Okay, very good. All right. But I, not knowing which museum it was, I wrote to the council in Warwick or Warwickshire to try and find out more about it, but they never got back to me.
Well, John's got my email address. John, if you send Alistair my email address, then we can get in touch with each other.
Yes.
Excellent.
I'll pass it on to Alistair, and perhaps you can liaise. And
Yes,
Yeah.
certainly.
We'll do that. We might be able to repatriate him, you never know.
We're planning a raiding party down to Warwick to get them back.
You failed before.
Okay. Do we have any other questions for our speaker this evening?
I was wondering if I might ask a question. Brethren, I'm currently the Deacon Convener of the Trades of Edinburgh, and I have an interest in both Freemasonic and the ancient incorporation mysteries. My understanding is that a seal of cause gave an incorporation under Deacon a privileged position within the cities, the royal boroughs across Scotland, in that they became part of the council and were therefore part of the governance, the decision-making bodies within the royal boroughs. So I'm surprised that the choice to be autonomous was a good one. I wonder if you've got any thoughts on that.
Well, just in as much as that's what they chose to do, they apparently felt that if they remained within the incorporation of all the other trades, the borough would have more control over them, and they wish to remain autonomous themselves.
Right. That's interesting, because if they were actually part of the council, then they could have influenced that. It was just from the Middle Ages for places like Aberdeen, Glasgow, Irvine, Dundee. These individuals became part of the powerhouse. You know, the sort of like deacons. It was all about status, and incorporated status was bigger in terms of influence than a society. So it's an interesting one that I'd love to look into further. Obviously, today you still have the 7 trades of Aberdeen that are still influential and powerful within the city, albeit the ancient incorporations lost their monopolies in 1846. But up until then, as far as I've been made aware, they pretty much reigned supreme within royal boroughs. So it's maybe we want to look into further.
Possibly, yes, definitely. Just from the records that we have, and other research done by the likes of Professor Stevenson and A.L. Miller, that that's the conclusion that they came to, that the Masons felt that they wouldn't have the autonomy that they felt they deserved, and that's why they went their own way.
Thanks.
Okay. Okay, are there any other questions for Brother Alistair this evening? No?
Yeah, well,
Okay.
number one, I was intrigued to hear that there was a operative lodge persisting into the 1950s. Was that the last operative lodge, or are there others even still in existence? I wonder whether you would know that, please.
The operative lodge in Aberdeen, number 150, was chartered, I think, 1781, thereabouts. They let the operative masons, stonemasons, left the Lodge of Aberdeen for the reasons that I said, that they felt money was being, they weren't happy about money being spent on building the new inn. The money should have been dispersed more to widows and other causes. And they went and they formed their own lodge. But up until 1963, they only admitted stonemasons. So it was very much an operative lodge until 1963. And it was post-war that a lot of the, or most of the quarries shut and the granite works went into severe decline. So there were no stonemasons coming through to join the lodge. And that was, so in 63, they decided to admit non-masons, well, non-stonemasons. And the last, one of the last stonemasons from the operative lodge was Provincial Grand Master of Aberdeen City, unfortunately only for about 2 years. Harry, do you want to say any more about that?
About Alex Smith. Alex Smith, the last one that I knew. There were others in the lodge, but they weren't masons as such. They are in some of the ancillary jobs like stone polishers and such, like one who just died last week before. But the operative lodge was a very active stonemason lodge, both here and abroad. They, during the winter months, they worked here in Aberdeen, preparing stones for buildings, and then during the summer months, they would go with the stones and erect the structures. Paris Opera House, the Thames Embankment, Liverpool Docks, the piers at Sydney Harbour Bridge. They went over to the States and in Maine, and I think other place in New England, and helped open up quarries there, and assisted in the building of the Capitol building in Austin in Texas. So they were in their, 200 years or so of being an purely operative lodge. They were a very busy lodge, and their records contain quite a lot of that information. The minutes.
Fascinating, thank you.
Okay, Brennan, unless there's any other questions.
I have one last question from Brother Alexander Moncrief, who says that he understands the Mark book was reproduced by a prestigious firm of printers in Glasgow. He's asking how long that took, and could I also ask, how many copies were actually made?
I think we should ask Andy Mushet to answer that question.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. As you can probably see by the state of me, it was a labour of love producing that particular book. And there were, in fact, I think at the moment, I think there's only about 3 that have been produced. One for the Lodge, one was bought by Moses Gomez, and I think there was A&, and I can't remember precisely where it was in America. But it was produced to, as you would imagine, the very highest of standards, with paper that was handmade, leather that was beaten by my own hands into submission, and it was gold-tooled, absolutely exactly as a facsimile of the book as it stands today. I would recommend that book to anyone who wished to have a copy of it in their collection, and I would refer you to Brother Alistair McIntosh, who has got the wherewithal to give you permission to get one of those books. Fantastic book, wonderful, wonderful looking item. So don't hold back. Buy one today.
Very good, very good.
If I may, this is a prototype, I believe. Alistair, is it not?
No, the original was produced, and then because of the potential price that was being asked, 2 other volumes were produced, a hardback one, just more than A4, and a softback one, and I think that's the softback one you've got.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
I've got the hardback sitting about 3 feet from me just now.
Hold it up, Alistair, hold it up.
Just a minute.
Keep the price ticket hidden. If you might be interested in why Moses Gomez bought one to take back to the States with him, Alistair mentioned John Skene as the first recorded Freemason in the northern, in the Americas, if you wish, the Northern America. And of course, he's held in high esteem in New Jersey, where he is buried. And they consider him as the founder of New Jersey Masonry.
Yeah, that was good, Alistair.
It's an absolute, it's a beautiful piece of work.
I'd see it.
As Andy said, it's a true facsimile. Each page was photocopied. It was photographed, rather. And if it's just, I'll open it anywhere. There's an example. On the, I don't know if it's your right or left, but you see the ink marks on the page. That is an exact copy of the original Mark book, which has, you know, there's another example. I don't know if you can see that properly.
Excellent.
You see the ink marks on the obverse page. Is that the correct terminology, Andy?
It is.
Alistair, are the marks all exclusively from your own lodge, from 1.ter?
Which marks?
The marks in the Mark book.
Yes, they all belong to the, I mean, that's the first page.
Okay, but my reason for asking is in GKL4s we have recorded in some of the earlier marks are from brethren of other lodges, and I've obviously still got a bit of research to do to find out why that might be. But I was trying to work out if it was perhaps common in the mid 1800s for brethren from visiting lodges to record their marks or not.
I can't answer that one particularly, but the 2 slides that showed St. Macher Cathedral and Bridge D, was it? Mason marks. Probably not all original Aberdeen, in that certainly in the likes of Masons coming up from other parts of the country might have brought their own marks with them, so they're not maybe exclusively Aberdeen.
Thank you.
Thank you. Brendan, last chance, any further questions? Okay then, Brendan, thank you. Thank you, Alistair, for an excellent presentation, and thanks to all the brethren who fired in some questions there to help clarify some of the comments and issues raised by Brother Alistair then. But overall, an excellent presentation, Alistair. Thank you very, very much indeed. And at this time, I might just ask our Grand Master Mason, Brother Ramsay McGee, if he would care to say a word at this time.
Thank you very much, John. Could I just add my thanks to Alistair for a very interesting presentation tonight. I found the PowerPoint very, very useful, and it was good to follow on the PowerPoint just some of the topics you were talking about. So it was a tremendous night. Thank you very much indeed, Alistair. And could I thank all of you? I see we've got 79 at the moment. We were up, I think, to 82 at one point, which is absolutely tremendous. So could I thank you all for supporting this Grand Lodge initiative through the History and Heritage Group. Thank you very much indeed. We look forward to seeing you all next week when we move back south again, down to Edinburgh, and Malcolm will be our host on that day to tell. Just keep smiling, Malcolm. We look forward to your presentation a week tonight. So thank you all very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you, Grandmaster Mason, for your comments and for your ongoing support to the History and Heritage Group. As Grandmaster Mason has just alluded to, our next presentation is a week this evening, Thursday, 9th of July, again a 7 o'clock kick-off. Canongate Co-winning No.2, and our speaker that evening is Brother Malcolm McRae, who's with us here this evening, of course. A link will come up on Facebook early part of next week, Monday probably. Next week, as I say, Canongate Co-winning No.2 will be the last in the current series, the first series. The next series is planned to start on Thursday, 10th of September, when we will invite Lord Scone in Perth, No.3, and thereafter we will invite on a weekly basis the Lodge of Glasgow St John, No.3 Biz, Glasgow Co-winning, No.4, Canongate and Leith and Canongate and Leith and Canongate, No.5, and No.6, the old Inverness Co-winning St John's Lodge. I will communicate with each of those 5 lodges over these next few days just to check their availability on the dates in question. So next week is our last. We have a wee summer break in case anybody likes to fly away and have a wee holiday, as if. I would just again thank everybody for their participation, for all the lodges who have undertaken the work. It's been tremendous so far, and I have no doubts that Malcolm next week will rise to the standard that we have seen over the past 4 weeks. Just before we move to a conclusion, when we have the open mics just for a few minutes to let you say your cheerios, etc., can I just remind you of the new oral history project that's as advertised as of yesterday, when we're inviting brethren to tell us about their experiences during the pandemic through creating their own short video, 4 or 5 minutes, details of which they can get from Charles Winson, the initial contact they can get through the Lodge Secretary. But I would encourage you, brethren, please give that some thought, and if you are able, please give us that short video that will help will have a place in the history of our lodges. We'll now move, as I said, to open mics if we can, so that you can, brethren, just say hello and a cheerio and etc. But finally, again, Alistair, thank you. Excellent stuff. Well done, sir. Open mics. If anybody has any cheerios or whatever to say, please do.
Congratulations, Alistair. Thank you very much for a first-class presentation. Very enjoyable.
Thanks, Alistair. Great.
Thank you. Thank you, Alistair. Excellent presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Alistair. Well done.
Thank you very much. Good to see you, brother.
Well done, Alistair. Good presentation. See you all. Stay safe, brother.
Thank you, Alistair.
Yes, thank you, Alistair. That was superb tonight. Thoroughly enjoyed that.
Thank you.
Well done, Alistair. Well done, Alistair.
Well done. Thank you, Alistair.
Thank you.
Paul, I'll be in touch and give you contact from Alistair about those jewels in Warwick.
Yeah, lovely. Yes. Thank you, Alistair, and we'll speak soon.
I'll get the raiding party sorted out.
Take care, everybody. Have a good summer break.
Thank you, Paul.
Well done, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Alistair.
And Alistair. Great night. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you for your support, Andy.
Thank you, Brother Alistair, and thanks also to the committee for organising this very enjoyable lecture. Thank you all.
Thank you, Alistair from Terry Stoddard.